this is such an important topic, I'm very pleased to be able to present this today. And I've had some personal experience with my mother, but I've been interested in this topic ever since I became a geriatrician because it's such a common problem. A little background about myself. I've been in practice now about 37 years, and the first half of my career I spent in Kansas City in the practice of geriatrics. I entered academic medicine about 15 years ago here in San Antonio with the Health Science Center. And we have a division of geriatrics at the Health Science Center that's community-based at Christus Santa Rosa Hospital out on Babcock at the Medical Center. We also run an inpatient unit and several nursing homes. The topic we're going to discuss today is financial abuse of the elderly. And I am going to try and present this in about 30 minutes, so it's a lot of information in a relatively short period of time. What I'd like for you to get out of this is why do elders part with their money? How does that happen? And who are the people that would do this? What are the perpetrators? And what are they thinking? And how do we as family members and friends and healthcare providers recognize financial abuse? So what do these scam artists know? And scam artists, I'm going to include just anybody that abuses an elder financially. They know that the elderly have a large life savings. The elderly are often cognitively impaired. They have trouble making complex decisions. They have impaired decision-making capacity. They're emotionally vulnerable. They're trusting without question. They came from another generation. They're slow to report a loss or an injury. Now, the National Center on Elder Abuse defines financial abuse of the elder as financial exploitation as the illegal or improper use of an elder's funds, property, or assets. So I'm going to tell you a few stories to demonstrate some of the concepts and schemes that are perpetrated upon our victims. This is Mrs. Gettings, and she was a victim of the Canadian lottery scam, which is a clever scam. Mrs. Gettings is 77 years old at the time. She lived alone. She enjoyed entering sweepstakes and thought she was going to win something. She got on a mailing list. She was called to be told that she won about $250,000. But all she had to do was pay $10,000 for taxes to cover the taxes on her winnings, and then her check would be shipped to her. She was asked not to tell her family or her friends until the sponsor was ready to announce the winners. And these are very carefully scripted conversations with Mrs. Gettings to prepare her to do this. She wrote a check and sent it in. When her check cleared, she was finally told that the first prize winner had been disqualified and that she could now claim the $2 million first prize. But, of course, she had to pay the $70,000 for additional taxes. And unfortunately, she sent the check in, and of course, she never saw the $2 million. A MetLife study looking at the prevalence of financial abuse in the elderly in 2010 showed that financial scams cost our elder victims at least $2.9 billion in 2010. So it's a fairly good-sized industry. Most of it is offshore, that of which isn't perpetrated by relatives. And 20% of Americans over the age of 65 have been victims of financial swindles. This is in 2010. It's probably greater than that. So why are the elderly so vulnerable? They are trusting. They're often isolated and lonely. They're frail. They may have physical impairments. They're frequently cognitively impaired, but their families don't recognize the impairment, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. They're often quite depressed, and of course, they got money. So who's at risk? Some of the conditions that increase our risk for financial abuse is isolation, living alone, loneliness, recent losses, particularly of a child or a spouse, and women, incidentally, are victims much more often than men. They're probably about 60 to 70% of the victims, and they often have mental or physical impairments. They're frequently unfamiliar with financial matters. And they often will have family members who are unemployed or have substance abuse problems who are willing to victimize their relatives or parents. People over age 50 control over 70% of the nation's wealth. So that makes us very attractive, those of us that do have some money, to be victimized. And many seniors don't realize the value of their assets, particularly in their homes that have appreciated over the years. And the elderly have physical disabilities that will also make them dependent upon others, so they will have in-home help or a child or neighbor or friend that's helping them with their day-to-day activities. And many of them are just unsophisticated about financial matters. Contracts are a lot more complicated today. In fact, just the contracts that you sign for a credit card, I don't know if anybody reads those anymore or not, are complex and hardly understandable by anybody but an attorney. They're a lot less likely to take actions against the people that perpetrate financial abuse, either because they're sick and they don't have the energy, or they're afraid that they're going to embarrass their family, particularly if it's a cousin or a nephew or a grandson. They just don't want to embarrass the family and alienate that part of the family. They're also fearful that they may lose some of their independence, simply because when the family does recognize the financial abuse, they're going to get a power of attorney and take over the finances of that victim. And so they're going to lose some financial independence. The abusers often assume that these frail victims aren't going to live long enough to follow through on legal interventions, or they're not going to make a convincing witness because they're frail and elder and may have some cognitive impairment. Also, our advances in technology have made managing finances so much more complex and in many ways easier. For example, all you really need is an account number and a password to access somebody's checking account. And money can be moved around quite easily. So some of the clues that we might notice on financial abuse and our interactions with our elders, both as healthcare providers and as family members and friends, are looking at the living conditions. Often they're quite a bit lower than their financial resources would permit. And many of us would think, well, they lived through the Depression, they're frugal, so this is just part of their personality. But this is usually far beyond that. They won't be repairing their heating and cooling, for instance, because they just simply can't afford it when something breaks down. You'll see unusual bank account transactions reported by bank authorities, and many of the banks are now training all of their staff to recognize these transactions and hold up the transaction until they're verified. And I've given several talks to detectives and bank employees on this very subject. So it is a service that I think is very important for the banking industry. Frequently, checks for cash will be written to a caregiver or financial professional, and these checks for cash ought to be a red flag. Attempts to isolate the elder from others. So we see caregivers or family members that are taking care of a loved one, and they tend to keep the rest of the family away from them, so they don't examine the financial well-being of that particular parent. They often will refuse to leave and accompany the victim every place they go. They're very evasive about financial arrangements. We won't be able to see the bank accounts. We'll see sudden changes in a bank account or banking practices, such as putting names on bank accounts that aren't relatives or are relatives, and credit cards also will have another name on it. Abrupt changes in a will or a financial document, a change or establishment of a new power of attorney. Unpaid bills, despite available funds, should be a clue. Unnecessary home repairs and services such as a new roof or yard work or a new air conditioner. Sudden appearance of previously distant relatives. And I have some stories about this that I'll mention to you later. But they're fairly common, and they often are unemployed and willing to take care of the loved one and move into their home. Transfers of title of the home or other assets for no apparent reason. Establishment of an unusual or unnecessary line of credit, such as a second mortgage. Disappearance of funds or valuable possessions, such as jewelry. So who are these people? Who are the perpetrators that are willing to do this? Often they're family members. In fact, it's estimated that more than 70% of the time it is a family member. They can also be caregivers, and they may be ones that we've hired ourselves or ones that come from an agency. We want to make sure that there's been a background check on the caregivers that come into the home. Usually there hasn't been. Home repair scammers, we hear this on the nightly news all the time. Investment scammers, think Bernie Madoff, telemarketers that are calling all the time. Many of our elders still answer the phone and have a phone home line rather than a cell phone. Fraudulent charities. We have those in San Antonio. The Texas Rangers Museum was real popular at one point. It was in the news because they were only distributing, I think, 2 or 3% of their funds to the recipients of the charity, and the rest of it was going to salaries and operating expenses. These are often complete strangers. Often there are people that will finagle a financial power of attorney, mail fraud, sweepstakes, counterfeit prescriptions. Medications are so expensive now for patients, particularly as they're taking more and more of the drugs as they become older with multiple chronic conditions, that they'll get on the internet or they'll have a friend that'll order a medication from Canada or India, and often these medications are ineffective or counterfeit. Pyramid schemes, much like the one that Bernie Madoff had. Other common scams that we see a lot. I was driving through the neighborhood and noticed you got a few shingles loose on your roof. Let me fix it. Or think of me as your daughter. I'll just help you out with your daily activities. I can take you shopping and just help you around the house. The grandparent scam. I've been hearing more of this, and actually I've had several phone calls and emails stating that one of my grandchildren or one of my children was stranded in another country and needed to have some money wired to them. And often they'll just call up on the phone and say, "Hi, Grandma, do you know who this is?" And, of course, Grandma will guess which one of her grandkids it is. And, "Look, I'm having some trouble. Can you send me some money?" Another person may say, I want to help you pay your bills. It's difficult sitting down and figuring out the bills and balancing your checkbook. We get invitations in the mail that are quite beautiful that say, this seminar is going to change your life. Come to have this free dinner and we'll just discuss this investment opportunity. Then the old Nigerian scam, which is not as popular as it used to be because I think most people are onto it now, but a wealthy Nigerian's trying to leave the country, wants to take out $100 million with him. He's unable to move the funds without having a bank account in the United States, wants you to open a bank account, and in the process you wind up opening an account with a certain amount of money, and guess what? That money disappears, of course. Phone call from an unknown person stating that he's a bank examiner, needs to have your account numbers and so forth so they can audit the bank and, of course, empty your bank account. We see home health aides from agencies that really are not certified and don't exist and infiltrate a wealthy person's home.